is mercy. Your message is liberation. Because winter has broken, and death has broken, and morning has broken, and earth and heaven have spoken, and say in unison, awake. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. We have much in store for us, so let us get going with announcements.
I know that a lot of you will be rushing off to visit family today, but if your morning is a little more leisurely, please join us for coffee in the parish house. We even have a few treats. Thanks. I know. Sad.
Alrighty. I have a couple of announcements. Well, Scripture. I have cobbled things together, excuse me, to make up for the fact that if we're only here on Sundays, at the end of last Sunday's service, Jesus had arrived in Jerusalem with his friends, and there was mass confusion as to exactly who he was. Was he the king? Was he a revolutionary leading an uprising of the people? Was he a heretic? Was he this? Was he that? Was he a threat? Was he a promise? And now here we are on Easter celebrating. But exactly what? Well, we have a Thursday night service. It's called Maundy Thursday. More people are coming to it every year, which is wonderful, I think. It's a great service, and it makes things a little more coherent. Briefly, what happens on Maundy Thursday is it is the night of the Last Supper. It is the night before Passover. Jesus and his 13, at that point, closest disciples have supper together, and everything goes wrong. And Jesus and Judas have a falling out. Judas stalks off angry. He's going off to betray Jesus. They have their supper, and Jesus gives them his last commandment, which is, this is my last commandment I give to you, that you should love one another as I have loved you, so you love one another. Okay, then he goes off in the garden where he prayed, and the disciples disown him, and he gets arrested. And now I'm going to pick up with what happened on Friday. So he's seized in the garden by a sort of a mob of soldiers and guards from the temple. And then the temple leaders took Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor, because remember, the Jews were living in an occupied country, and a force from Rome, an imperial army, has conquered much of Israel, certainly Jerusalem, and they are leading, the Jews are oppressed, severely taxed by their oppressors, the Romans. So, temple leaders took Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. You've heard of him. Pilate asked Jesus, "So, are you the king of the Jews?" "You say so." Jesus replied, "Oh, you are a king then," said Pilate. "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and the reason I came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me." But what is truth?" replied Pilate. Then, tiring of his sport, he had Jesus whipped and handed him over to soldiers who led Jesus away, put a royal purple robe on him, twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. And they began to call out, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And again, they hit him on the head with a staff, and they spat on him. Falling on their knees, they pretended to pay homage to him. When they had mocked him sufficiently, they took off the purple robe, put his own clothes on him, and had nailed him to a wooden cross. 2 thieves were crucified with him, one on his right, the other on his left. A crowd stood watching, and the temple rulers even sneered at him. "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's the Messiah." And Jesus only said from the cross, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." One of the thieves who hung beside him jeered, "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us too." But the other thief rebuked him. "Look, we're getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Well, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And soon after, again in a loud voice, "Father, Abba," it's like saying Dad, "into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. Now, Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of the temple elders, but a secret follower of Jesus, goes to Pontius Pilate, asks for and receives Jesus' body, and brings it to a tomb, his own tomb. He's thought well ahead. He's got a tomb already for himself when he dies. And he places Jesus there and gets a couple of people to roll a huge rock into the doorway, blocking it off. Okay. Now, that's the Friday stuff. And I know it's brutal. I do. But without this context, the triumph of an empty tomb is an empty triumph. So here is the Sunday. Here's what happened on the Sunday. On Saturday, the Sabbath day, in between, the disciples just laid low. Because clearly they felt like they were marked for death too. But early in the morning, on Sunday, the first day of the week, while it was still dark, one of Jesus's most faithful followers, Mary Magdalene, who in some traditions or in some versions is described to have been a prostitute who Jesus has liberated from that life, and she is one of his most dedicated followers. So early in the morning on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb, and she saw that the stone was moved away from the entrance. So she ran at once to Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved. Okay, didn't he love them all? Yes, he did. But this is from the Gospel of John. And the disciple that Jesus loved, according to John, is John. But he's very humble and doesn't say that I, and he says, she ran and told Peter and the disciple that Jesus loved, and she came to him saying, they took the master from the tomb. I don't know where they put him. So Peter and the other disciple that Jesus loved left immediately for the tomb, and they ran there neck and neck. And the other disciple got to the tomb first, because he outran Peter. Stooping to look in, John saw the pieces of linen that Jesus had been covered with lying there, but he didn't go in. Peter arrived after him, shoved past him, entered the tomb, and also observed the linen cloth lying there, and the kerchief that had been used to cover Jesus' head was neatly folded. Then the other disciple, the one who had gotten there first, I read you all this part just to show you how human these guys are. Little rivalries and so on. Then the other disciple, the one who had gotten there first, he went into the tomb, took one look at the evidence, and believed. No one yet knew from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. They interpreted all that later. So the disciples then went back home. But Mary Magdalene stuck around, and she was standing outside the tomb weeping. As she wept, she knelt to look down into the tomb, and she saw two angels sitting there. They were dressed in white, one at the head, the other at the foot of where Jesus' body had been laid. They looked up, saw her, and asked, "Woman, why do you weep? They took my master, and I don't know where they put him." After she said this, she turned away and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't recognize him. Jesus also asked her, "Woman, why do you weep? Who are you looking for?" Mary Magdalene, thinking that he was the gardener or something, said, "Mister, if you took him, tell me where you put him so I can care for him." And then Jesus said to her, "Mary." Turning to face him, she said, "Rabboni," which in Aramaic means "my teacher," almost like a guru. A personal relationship is implied. And Jesus said, "Yes, but don't cling to me, for I haven't ascended to the Father yet. Go to my brothers and tell them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, my God and your God." So Mary Magdalene went, telling the disciples, "I saw the Master." And she told them everything that Jesus had said to her. And for once, they listened. And that is our scripture. Make yourselves at home. We're going to pause a beat or two here. Come on in as soon as you're ready, Polly. Well, the thing about that is, she is heavy laden.
This is my granddaughter.
Welcome, River.
Welcome to the world.
Okay. Well, for a sermon after all that, I just want to observe that, in our community life, we really don't get it sometimes till the person dies. The arc of her story or the meaning of his life. How many times have you been to funerals and hear all these loving tributes to the person who's died and thought, why didn't we do this 2 years ago when we could have told her how wonderful she was? But this is the way we do it. So we don't really get it sometimes until the person dies and lives again in tributes and memory and in our realization of how our life has been influenced by theirs. How much they mattered. Or you never miss your water till the well runs dry. Then we notice. So, Jesus and his disciples. Well, the disciples, over time, gradually make sense out of his life and his death, and study scriptures and choose different meanings and interpretations. And they understand differently those things that he had taught them while he was with them. And the disciples persevered, teaching and preaching, gathering their own followers as they spread the word. They developed customs and rituals. They wrote Jesus' life in more than 4 Gospels. In the Bible, there are 4, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There are all sorts of ancient manuscripts with other Gospels that were not included in the agreed upon texts. Well, as it continued, this little cult grew and became a religion. Well, but back to Jerusalem that month. There had been that last tragic evening together when Jesus fell into the hands of his enemies after the Last Supper. And that sounds funny to say. He fell into the hands of his enemies. Jesus loved. Jesus forgave. He wouldn't have enemies, would he? But the enemy gets a vote too. The authorities, the temple priests and the Roman governor and military, they had an enemy, and it was Jesus. As far as they were concerned, he was a heretic to one group, threatening the religion, the would-be king and leader of a revolution, as far as the other group was concerned, and threatened the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, which depended on the conquered peoples staying conquered. So the authorities did what they thought they had to do. But putting that aside, each Easter is different. The world we live in this year is the same old world, and it's a lot different than it looked last year. Each Easter is different. And it's Peter and the rest of the 12 disciples that I'm feeling for, or feeling with this year. And just in that moment, I want to allow them their simple grief when they have to admit it's over. That the adventure they've been living, the little band, spreading love across the land, living hand to mouth, making believers out of strangers, teaching forgiveness, honoring the poor, propping up Jesus, enabling him to do his healing. And them, just 12 guys, and Mary, mother, Mary, sister of Martha and Lazarus, and Mary Magdalene, them, and a bunch of guys. And they were part of the miracle. That whole glorious journey with Jesus. They didn't know where it was headed. They didn't know how it would end. They were just part of the miracle, that whole glorious journey. They'd been part of the kingdom of heaven, which is here on earth now, when God's way is lived on earth as it is in heaven, and was often within them and round about them on their great journey. When suddenly, and they hadn't expected it, suddenly it all blew up. And Jesus, he led it, or he helped it all blow up. They couldn't be sure why he behaved the way he did at that supper. He accused Judas and sent him off on his evil errand. And then he went out into the unfamiliar city, in some garden where he kneeled. And he asked the disciples to watch over him as he prayed, exposed in the dangerous dark. And what did they do? What did we, disciples, do? I'm decidedly a disciple this year. When he said, watch over me while I pray, they fell asleep. We fell asleep. We were exhausted and troubled and Jesus was arrested. And us, we didn't know what to do except flee and then hide. We just followed our survival instincts. And I hate to admit this, we didn't even dare, we couldn't even bear to look back. But the Marys looked and saw how they done it. And all we know is it's over. And we have this leftover life to live, to figure Jesus out, leftover life to decide what to do, to try to do God's unknowable will and follow Jesus' loving, abundant, and dangerous path to martyrdom. But first, just first, we had to cope with being left alone. Left alone with a death, and how to deal with that death that came too early and that doesn't rest easy. Have you been there? Have any of you been there with a death that came too early and doesn't rest easy? I know that some of you have, and I honor that experience. So the question is not only have you been there, the other question we have is, will you leave others there someday, mourning a death that came too early or that doesn't rest easy? Well, what I really want to do right now is tell you a story, if that's okay. A little bit of biography, but I think you don't all know it. I'm the oldest of 4 brothers. My father died when I was 20, and so my brothers were 17, 15, and 11 years old. And he was, my dad, one of the gods of my childhood. Of course, he was a hero, and he was a paradox. He was so present, wise, tender, and understanding when he was sober. And he was so drunk by bedtime every night. He was 48 when he died. No one was ready for him to die. I wonder where the poems are that he didn't get to write, who the students were that he never taught, where the paths would have led his sons if we'd known him longer. Well, that's us left behind. He himself, I'm not sure. I always worried if he was ready. It didn't feel as though he'd reached that peace before he died in the hospital. But, I was 20. I didn't know. 3 months after he died, I got married. The years went by. 2 children came. I set out farming here in Cummington. The marriage ended. skip ahead to just about 20 years after he died, and I was in the true marriage. I was in the middle of the rest of my life, my life without him, as you're all in the middle of it, right up to the end. And it was then that this, I don't know the word for it, it was then that this happened. We were in bed, Connie had fallen asleep. The light was still on in the room, and I was just lying there very content. And then I was inside a big beehive, and I was little. I was the same size as the bees, okay, in this beehive. Actually, it had sort of a shape like that at the top. So surrounded by honeycomb. Some of the cells were full of honey, some were empty. The bees were coming and going, doing their work, ignoring me. And everything was perfect. There didn't need to be another place, another thing, another action, another being in the world. It was all complete in that busy hive. It was warm and perfect. Finally, something in life was perfect. It was warm, and it began to get warmer, and warmer still, not uncomfortable, but warmer still. And the honeycomb, the waxy honeycomb, began to melt. And it was ivory colored and honey golden. They began to melt and to flow. Got warmer still, and the bees began to melt. Black and gold and flow. I began to melt and flow. Everything flowed together. It was perfect. And then, in the room, in the bedroom, there was a voice out loud. I heard it. It said, "Your father is very near to God." After the voice, there was a silence, and I just burst, almost literally burst, into tears. I don't cry very often at all, but burst into grateful tears, tears of relief, tears of rebirth, a lifetime's worth of tears. I didn't know how worried, how scared I had been for him, dying as troubled as he was. I didn't know how much I needed to know that he was all right. And I did, and I melted, almost literally, in tears. Well, that's my story. I'm in no hurry to die, but you can see why my